Welcome to The Big Picture, a show that takes a deep dive into the political landscape of not only America, but right here in our own backyard of Illinois.
It's showtime, folks.
The Big Picture is on WCPT 820. And now, here's your host, Edwin Eisendrath.
Hello, everybody. Happy Saturday. Please wake up, pay attention. I want to talk to you about the 5 days that could change the entire world. And we've just been through them and people aren't noticing. Well, some people aren't. In 5 lawless, reckless, greedy days, Donald Trump and the Republicans have done more damage to our nation, our way of life, our future prosperity than any foreign enemy could ever dream to do. That is, I'm afraid, not an understatement. Every fear of those of us who campaigned to keep him from the White House, well, they've been amply justified. We are in an existential fight with an entrenched power that is hostile to much of America and willing, no, strike that, eager to sell out our future for his personal gain and present gain. Look, last night, Republicans made Pete Hegseth the Secretary of Defense. These are guys who are talking about merit. We're going to base our decisions on merit. BS. They're making them on loyalty, or maybe loyalty is their definition of merit. Even before he got the job, the administration took steps to remove women from the armed forces. No matter how talented, female flyers are no longer welcome to apply for the Top Gun program. One commander posted his rules, and they limit women on the base to participate in genteel sports like badminton. Are you kidding? Hegseth himself is hostile to women in the service. That was clear. And he lied during his confirmation hearing when he claimed that standards had been lowered or quotas had been set to bring women into the service. There are no such orders. He lied. Character, very important in that job. Very important in our armed services, not apparently for the guy in charge. And no doubt it wasn't just women pilots. No doubt black pilots are next because the Air Force stripped all reference to the Tuskegee Airmen from Air Force training and history classes, claiming that just their mention violates some anti-DEI mandate. That's our history, and we are proud of it. Shame on you. Hegseth's hostility to women, his lies, they're not his only disqualification. How about this one? He's refused to rule out ordering the military to attack American citizens, to occupy American cities, to impose martial law, even if illegally ordered by his boss. Look, those aren't unanswerable hypothetical questions because Mr. Trump has promised to do all of those things. I know. Should we believe him? Before the election, it's just bluster. But you know what? This first week shows us he means what he says, so we better take him seriously. Because over at the Justice Department, even before his private attorney gets confirmed to be our Attorney General, Trump has filled staff leadership positions, and already justice has been corrupted. The department ordered a federal judge to revoke a judicial order. This particular order required the seditious insurrectionist Stuart Rhodes to get permission from the court before traveling to the Capitol. Whatever you think about that order, and I think it's more than reasonable given what he did, but whatever you think about it, it's not up to the president in a democracy and in a country with an independent judiciary to tell a judge to revoke an order. But Trump is rapidly tearing up our Constitution, the one he just swore to defend a few days ago. Look, in these 5 days, he's rolled back 60 years of civil rights protections. Back in World War II, FDR banned discrimination in private military suppliers. His argument was that protecting our nation requires the help of every American. But Trump ripped that order up and many others that, did nothing more than demand we treat everyone fairly. The Justice Department ended enforcement of environmental and discrimination laws, and they shut down all litigation and reassigned the attorneys leading that work. This is, of course, illegal. No president is entitled to ignore laws passed by Congress. But Trump doesn't care. When he's sued, and he will be, I wonder whether he will comply with the court orders to restart the enforcement. This is just one more constitutional crisis this lawless despot has created in his first week. And where were those lawyers reassigned? Well, they were sent to the newly created Sanctuary City Working Group. That group is tasked with finding ways to criminally prosecute state and local authorities who don't cooperate with the federal effort to deport 11 million people. So much for federalism. In Trump land, the only thing that matters is that the power of the presidency shall have no limits. Resistance means prison. And you know what? The Republican Party are all in on it. Shame. Now ICE agents. Now this week, they're stopping cars on highways, demanding to see our papers. Are you kidding me? In Arizona, they're rounding up Navajo men and claiming that they are somehow not citizens entitled to vote, and they're locking them up. Wait a minute, they are entitled to vote. But even if they weren't, arresting them, threatening to deport them, Navajos, deport them to where? This is their home. Look, and nor is the damage of this week limited to the defense and justice, as big as those are. Imagine this, and really take a minute and follow this with me. Imagine a world where the internet, or AI and quantum computing, advanced logistics, new biomedical devices, where all of this was invented somewhere else. In that world, Apple, Amazon, Meta, all the other enormous creators of vast American wealth would not be. Instead, American consumers would be buying their products and services from China and Europe and other places. The wealthiest among us would be traveling out of the country for advanced medical care, and all of us would be poorer and more dependent on the rest of the world. But that's where we're now headed, because Donald Trump has declared war on higher education, the engine of all that innovation. He's cut research funding. He's ended ongoing studies, cancer studies, for gosh sakes, shut off funds that keep research centers open. What does that mean? That means a generation of young students, PhD students, working in labs across the country are being laid off. And you know what? They'll change careers. And we'll lose an entire generation of innovation, just at the time that AI and quantum computing will change the world. This is the terrifying stuff our enemies dream of. Look, I know these things, and I can talk about these things because we still have a free press, and we still have sources. And he's coming after them too. Meta and X, the two biggest news sources for Americans, are now using their algorithms to favor Trumpist propaganda. And in the government, Trump has already fired at least 17 inspectors general. Now, I don't know if you know what inspectors general are. They are appointed. They're there to find waste, fraud, and abuse in government departments. And their reports become public, and they are a vital, important part of government accountability in the United States. But Donald Trump does not want accountability. He does not want oversight. That is a check on his libidinous aim for power. We can still fight back, of course, because our electoral system still works. But if Trump gets his way, that too won't last. And then we're done. In North Carolina, a partisan Republican state Supreme Court is poised to throw out 60,000 ballots after an election, ballots that followed the rules that were in place during the election, and they're doing it to steal a seat on their own Supreme Court. And of course, their aim is to ensure that there are enough partisans on that court to jam through gerrymandered maps after the next census, which of course we no longer will be able to trust. Meanwhile, Trump himself has conditioned aid to California, still reeling from wildfires. And what was Trump's condition? That the state change its voting laws to make it harder for people to vote. They want to be entrenched in. They don't want us even to be able to vote them out. We are 1 week in, and Trump is going for it all. He will be our dear leader, and we, his obedient children. Unless, of course, you are female or black or just disagree with him, and then he will prosecute. As for me, I will resist. I will bear witness. I will fight, and I am not alone. The idea of America is not some candle to be snuffed out by a cunning fascist, even one elected to the presidency. It's not one to be blown away by a compliant Republican Congress that has lost any legitimacy as a governing party. It is not a candle, it's a supernova. It is mankind's highest expression of human dignity and value that we can govern ourselves. And those that think they can bring it down, you know what? Whether today or 100 years ago, they will always find themselves contemplating their own demise in the courtyards of their bunkers. I have a great show. We're going to take a break, and Jason Stanley, a fabulous Yale professor of philosophy and fascism, joins us after a quick break.
You're listening to The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
Okay, everybody, we are back, and I'm thrilled to be joined by Jason Stanley, who teaches philosophy at Yale. His work, it spans the philosophy of language, epistemology, social and political philosophy. He's the author of, gobs of books. Some of them are so important to this moment, including How Propaganda Works, How Fascism Works, The Politics of Us and Them, and his newest, How Fascists Rewrite the Past to Control the Future. He takes this stuff so seriously, he's willing to spend his time doing shows like this to talk about it with the rest of America. Professor Stanley, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Hey, before we get into these world consequential topics and this first week, oh my God, of the Trump administration is something. But before we do that, I wonder what brought you to, this decidedly rare profession of philosophy and to questions of language and meaning more generally?
Well, it was always, it struck me always that speech had central political importance, but I couldn't figure out how that was. And so I got interested very early on in my life in sort of the magical power of speech, not just how it conveyed information, but how it conveyed emotion, how it revealed kind of who you are. The way you speak reveals who you are. So I started sort of slowly looking at the informational parts of speech. And more recently, in my scholarly work and my public work, I've shifted to trying to understand how, how the kinds of political speeches we hear, above and beyond the information they're conveying, because often they don't convey information, how they move us, how they connect to our identities. So now my most recent scholarly book, before my newest public book, Erasing History, my latest scholarly book is about how speech conveys social identity. So I think we can see, for example, that Trump connects with a working class social identity. The policies he's suggesting are irrelevant. The plan for America is irrelevant. It's just like if you're a tough working class guy, you support Trump. And the way he speaks conveys that. So that's the kind of mechanism I'm interested in.
That's really fascinating. And you also looked at the complexity of history. And, the past includes more than just people and things done, but the forces that shape time. I'm a John Dewey fan. He teaches us that democracy and agency are linked and that's how we shape our future. I think Donald Trump thinks history is just the story of some men. And that has very different consequences, doesn't it?
Absolutely. So I'm a huge John Dewey fan as well.
Nice.
I teach philosophy of education. So that tradition of philosophy of education, Du Bois, Dewey, Paulo Freire, Howard Zinn, those discussions have deeply impacted me. And as you say, Trump thinks of history as the deeds of great men. And so when you think of history as the deeds of great men, then social movements, the labor movement, the people who brought us the weekend, the people who brought us the 8-hour workday. It's not a single great man who represents the labor movement. So history, if you focus on great men, first of all, women have no agency at all. They're just there to bear great men. And secondly, social movements, the ones that got us so much of what we love about our country. We talk about the American dream. The American dream is, a house, weekends off, some weeks vacation to go with your, maybe a small boat you can put on a lake for fishing. That dream was gotten to us by the labor movement. It wasn't great individual great men who got us there. And if you have the history of great men, you just miss all that.
You also get to select which men you're talking about. It makes a difference.
Absolutely. And so you typically, this was Hitler in Mein Kampf says that people have lost the art of selecting great men of the nation to instill patriotism in the people. So his idea is education should take the form of great Aryan men. And then people will feel proud of the greatness of their ancestry. So that's exactly right, this kind of selection.
Yeah. So every society has its narrative, even if the narrative is more of a fuzzy set than a well-defined box. But doesn't a society as diverse as ours need a narrative, maybe even more than a homogeneous society that people can lean into? And that need maybe leaves us open to its being hijacked.
Absolutely. A country needs a narrative. It needs a narrative. I mean, that's why Dewey emphasizes the importance of public schools. It's where we all come together and learn about each other. It needs a narrative that represents the perspectives of everyone, because a democracy is a system in which we all participate in the formation of the laws that govern us. And that participation can't simply take the form of voting, because then minority groups will always be outvoted. It needs to take the form of being exposed in schools to the perspective of everyone. So caring about your fellow citizens, even if they're only 10% of the population. That's something you learn about their story in schools. And then you vote for laws that take their perspectives into account. Now, if you want a tyranny of the majority, if you want to control the narrative, then you eliminate the perspectives that you don't want considered. And that's what we're seeing today.
Yeah. The big lie about 2020 and the pardons of January 6th, they look like efforts to rewrite history, I guess, like efforts to rewrite pieces of the Constitution, to impose that wacky 1776 project on the rest of us. All of this it goes right to controlling that narrative, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Well, the whole every time Trump talks about education, he says they're trying to get us to hate our country. We're going to replace it with an education that will make people proud of our country. That's not the goal of education. Think of your cartoon example, your cartoon picture in your head of an authoritarian society. It's one where the schools tell you the nation is the greatest, the leader is the greatest, you should be patriotic all the time. That's communist China. That's Russia under Putin. That is not a democratic society. What Trump and the Trump administration are saying they're going to do, and what people like Ron DeSantis have already done, is impose a vision of education where families can turn teachers in if they deviate from the path of just praising the nation. This is an authoritarian society. This vision of America is not a vision of democracy. It's a vision of slavish devotion to the nation. And if teachers deviate from that slavish devotion, or even professors, then they'll be sanctioned, fired, fined, etc.
Yeah. So we've been talking about this authoritarian viewpoint, but I've heard you go right to the F word. There are a lot of authoritarians in the world, but ours are fascist. I mean, I think I heard you say that. So let's talk about that.
Well, I don't want to get too bogged down in what's now called the fascism debate. When I wrote my 2018 book, How Fascism Works, I was saying the Trumpist movement looks like a fascist movement. At the time, the objections to that were things like, well, he's not weaponizing the justice system to go after his political opponents.
He's
not. Right. He's not suggesting territorial expansion.
Is now. Yeah, check.
Exactly. He's not trying to get people to turn each other in, to create an authoritarian society.
Yeah.
All that has changed, and I think the objections to regarding this form of authoritarianism as a fascist form have evaporated. I mean, it's clearly not communism.
Right. Absolutely. And its links to, I mean, I don't really want to play a Nazi card. I don't. But the campaign that's being run by, AfD in Germany, the leading candidate's biggest pledge is to tear down the monument to the murdered Jews of Europe that's in Berlin. That's his campaign pledge, right? And Trump is there. Yeah. I'm sorry, Musk is there campaigning with him today.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
That's terrifying.
Yes, it's terrifying.
Yeah, because the AfD in Germany, which looks like they might end up being the most popular party. I mean, it's a parliamentary system, but they are all about whitewashing the Nazi past. They're doing with Holocaust education, German history, what here in the southern states they're doing with black history under the rubric of attacking critical race theory. Right. This was inevitable. This was inevitable that this kind of thing would happen once the United States started saying, once you had a popular movement behind the view that we should not make America feel badly about slavery, it was just inevitable that a popular movement in Germany would arise that said we should not make Germans feel ashamed about Nazism.
Yeah, Jason, I don't think you have to be ashamed of your history to look. I mean, it wasn't you look backwards on history and it's ugly, a lot of it. And you have to own it to move forward. That doesn't necessarily translate into shame. Yeah. And so I don't want to see that.
And Germans weren't ashamed of their history. They just took that knowledge of their past to mean that they should speak to the world as the experts on it's not going to happen again.
Yeah, and they have for a long time.
And they have for a long time until they haven't. Yep. And now the worldwide far-right movement is obviously championing Germany, because if Germany can roll back facing the past, then really all bets are off.
Last night, the Air Force removed all teaching from its history and its training classes of the Tuskegee Airmen, claiming that mentioning it violates their new DEI principles.
Yeah, we're seeing that in universities too, like essentially removal of, so Harvard laid off the staff for all of its group that was looking at the descendants of those enslaved by Harvard that were sort of that were part of Harvard's property, essentially. So everyone is doing this. Rutgers made a similar move with a conference. It looks like, of course, everyone is taking the anti-DEI stuff to be directed at Black history. I mean, and that's how it's been working for years, ever since the attack on critical race theory. Oh, this is just attacking a radical theory. And then we see, you can't talk about slavery being central to U.S. history anymore.
Or women.
Or women, right. Women or LGBTQ citizens, LGBTQ perspectives. So,
or Native Americans.
Or Native Americans. Anything. And then initially the way it's done is, we're only going after this specific thing. But then, of course, it's taken to be much broader than that, which is always what it's intended. For instance, Trump's executive order that targeted DEI in the federal government rescinded Johnson's executive order of 1965 that made it illegal for that banned discrimination among federal contractors and was a central part of the civil rights program, civil rights legislation. Yeah. So they're targeting the whole deal. They're targeting everything, as AfD is targeting everything.
Yeah. And the targeting is for the purpose of not just changing our view of society, but changing the structure of power in America. I mean, what was your reaction when Trump, with his language, when he announced a golden age begins right now?
Well, that's just any authoritarian, autocratic leader is going to say, it begins and ends with me. I am, erasing everything that happened before him, saying it was all a nightmare. And now his rule will be this golden age because he did many clever things to set this up. The COVID checks, he had them signed by him. Yep. So people thought he was giving them the money personally. So he's going to take, he's very good at this kind of authoritarianism 101, making people think that he's responsible for any good thing and someone else is responsible for any bad thing.
I don't think there's anyone else left to blame. They got it. They're in control, and they're very clear.
Well, they're going to blame Biden for anything bad, even though Biden handed them an economy on the upswing.
Yeah. What is it? I mean, we haven't, I guess religion's part of this. What does it mean when a president lashes out in the middle of the night to try and take down a bishop whose sermon called for compassion? I mean, you've written about the topic of civic compassion. Talk about how that gets undermined.
Well, it's an attack on compassion, this whole system. That's why I would call it fascism, a fascist form of authoritarianism, because the idea is it's about winning. It's about dominating. It's about the group on top being the most powerful group, and losers deserve what they get. Why have compassion for losers? And it's horrifying that this is a kind of Christianity, white Christian nationalism or Christian nationalism. It makes no sense because Christianity is a universal religion. But the idea is it's all about the winners. And so compassion, civic compassion, is the foundation of a democratic society where it's not, actually the poor are not losers. They're other human beings, and you understand their path, and because you have compassion for them, you want to make their lives better. Trump's compassion for the working class, who he so strongly connects to with his powerful speeches and rhetoric and just whole way of being, showing up at MMA fights, things like this. This connection has nothing to do with making their lives better. It just gives them, makes them it's an entirely different thing. The world is divided into winners and losers. The billionaires are the winners, and Christianity, which is a religion about love, gets deformed into a religion about winners and losers.
I'm trying to I'm having a lot of trouble with these ideas. Frankly, I'm having trouble anymore understanding what an idea is. I know that sounds crazy, but I try and get a hold of it to understand it, and I don't anymore. The sense that it's all about power, but really it's all about affinity. I think Trump, what you're describing to me sounds like a man who's figured out how to use modern communication in every form we have to signal affinity with a group and make them afraid enough so that that's the thing they care about more than anything else.
Yeah, well, there's multiple things going on in his politics. One is this very powerful connection to the working class. I mean, Hillary Clinton in 2016 going around telling people that, don't worry, they're going to get their kids, her government will get their kids connected to Facebook and Google, and their kids will be working for Google soon. Like, that's not connecting to working class identity.
It's not. It's saying we're going to change your identity.
We're going to change your identity, exactly.
Yeah.
deeply offensive. And Trump understood that that's deeply offensive. And then he operates also with fear by saying all this new stuff. And these are standard moves that, when we talk about the Nazis, we're not saying that Trump is going to, he's not going to do anything against Jewish people. That's an accidental feature. It's an essential feature of Hitler, but you can have fascism that's not anti-Semitic. And he's using a lot of classic fascist politics. He's making people afraid that their traditions will be that are under threat from immigrants. Their cultural dominance will be under threat from immigrants who have different traditions, that their children are under threat from LGBTQ citizens and LGBTQ activists, and he's the strong man who will protect them. And this appeals to people with working class identities, to many people with working class identities, though not all. There's always been a working class left. That's the core of the left. And it appeals to religious conservatives and social conservatives. And that's how fascists come to power. They enlist the billionaire class, the business elite, together with the religious conservatives and the working class against the cultural elite and the people in the cities. And that's the structure we're seeing here.
It seems, though, an opportunity for those of us who hope he does not succeed in his mission to exploit what seems to be an irreconcilable chasm between the billionaire class and the working folks. The lives of Jeff Bezos are also antithetical to the values of working Americans.
Well, one would think, but this whole macho winners, losers, power, as my colleague Dan Hosang and his co-author Joe Landis put it, parasites and producers. This idea that, the working class does real labor, Elon Musk does real labor, Jeff Bezos, they're winners, and then all of these like city folk and intellectuals, they're lazy losers. This is the underlying ideology. And so it has proven in country after country over time. Durable. You disconnect people's material well-being from their cultural identity. You say, we're going to take your health care away. We're going to cut Social Security. We're going to cut taxes on the billionaire class. That'll be our main thing we do. Is just shovel tons and tons of money to the billionaires to bankrupt our country. And then we're going to tell you we love you and we're representing you against the college professors.
Well, right. So college professors you named as an enemy. And for a reason, I think that there are alternative sources of legitimacy in any society. It's not just the government, and universities have been one. The media is one. Labor unions are one. Some churches are one. And it looks like they're coming after all of them.
Correct. That's what you do when you want to put the authority all in the billionaire class and the autocrat.
What happens at Yale, at universities that are dedicated to research, when the federal government decides, not pretending they're not doing it to attack universities, but for another reason, that they're just going to cut all NIH funding?
Nobody knows what's happening with the NIH. The website's shut down. The grant reviews have been put on indefinite pause. All sorts, the entire medical science of the United States at universities has been shut down in demonstration of power. Who knows when science will restart again? Science professors, totally apolitical science professors who have never, my colleagues who've never engaged with me on politics, who are off there doing cancer research or something else, suddenly they have no idea if their postdocs can travel to conferences, what's going to happen with their funding. What's going on? Then there's,
Well,
you contact the people who supported Trump. I have friends who supported Trump, like we all did, and they deny this is happening. But no, it's happening.
I mean, on top of it, putting pressure on universities, and I assume someday there will be a price they ask you to pay in order to start the spigot again. But if you lose a generation of young scholars, whether they're PhD students or postdocs, you have a cultural revolution like in China. You lose 20 years of progress.
Yeah, these are scientists that were that are being. I mean, they didn't. The war was against humanists, and the university leaders said, "Oh, they'll never go after the scientists. Maybe the climate control people looking at climate change. Maybe the public health people looking at diseases, but they'll never target medical science across the board." Nobody knows what's happening. Is it dysfunction? But what they're gunning, the United States, let's be clear, has the world's greatest university system. Community after community is propped up by their local universities. All across the world, people send their kids to our universities. The Trump administration, the Trump regime, has repeatedly tried to destroy the thing that the United States does greater than any country, that everyone agrees we do better than any other country. We're making it very difficult for people to send their kids to U.S. universities abroad from, say, China or any country, because immigration is just going to be so stressful. Not immigration, just coming here to go to university is just coming here. So you're taking the only country in the world, maybe Canada and the UK, but their universities are nothing like ours. And you're saying, okay, other countries, you be the best university system in the world. We're going to attack our science and research. We're going to make it that international students can't come here and pay enormous tuition fees that go to American communities, and we're going to do that just out of spite because we hate college professors, and that's how we're going to get votes.
Yeah, it's ugly. And a similar thing is happening in journalism. And it's
oh, absolutely. Well, the democratic institutions, I mean, this is just, Rachel Maddow said the other day, this is authoritarianism 101. You go after the media and you go after the professors. That's just what you do. And so, in each case, I know people in the media like who are just very professional. They don't intend to make a political statement. They're just doing their job and reporting the facts. And many of them are shocked when their legal department is coming and telling them, things that they've never heard before about, privacy, secrecy, these are just people doing the job of a free press in a democratic society. University professors, my colleagues in public health who just have barbecues with their kids and little league games. And they're just like, hey, we started doing this because we wanted to save people. And suddenly they're being attacked, death threats. This is just what happens in country after country with the democratic institutions, the schools and the press.
And I guess there's some more. I mean, in other countries, they're called NGOs, but here we favor our tax codes. We call them nonprofits, but they are looking at ways of declaring nonprofits to be unworthy of their nonprofit status.
Also, authoritarianism 101, that's what Russia did. That's what India did under Modi and BJP. That's what all authoritarians do. They target NGOs, i.e. nonprofits. So, they drive them out of the country. Russia drove them out of the country. They say they're trying to spread leftism and, liberal values. So all of this, and it's not an accident that it looks so much like Eastern Europe, and it's not an accident that it's shocking that Musk is campaigning for the AfD, but it's not surprising. It's a global far-right attack on democracy. And there's a playbook for it, and we're seeing the playbook play out here. And we know how it ends. It ends with, your leader dying in bed, of old age, and ruling for 25 years, like in Russia, or just, controlling here Trump is very old, but, it looks like he's setting up an autocratic regime.
Well, okay. I don't want to wait for him to pass in bed or for that regime. So what is it that, what are the ideas that you found that can help us create a more resilient democracy, one able to cope with the stresses and shocks that we've been through? And there are many of them. They're not just this one. I mean, if we had time, we could get in on the Supreme Court, but the Roberts Court has certainly made this moment possible, from Citizens United to undoing voting rights to legalizing gerrymandering. They have, I think Roberts is the chief architect of this moment. But what can we do to be more resilient?
Well, labor unions are going to be key. I think trying to get the message through that what's good for billionaires is actually not good for the working class. That professors, teaching a whole bunch of courses and rushing from campus to campus, making $80,000 a year. These are not your enemies. They're also working class people for the most part. The people who are robbing your pockets but showing up to MMA fights and telling you they're your buddies. Those are actually your enemies. So getting back to material politics, that's the core of democracy. Delivering for the people on their health care, on material things, and getting people oriented towards that. That's going to be really key. And seeing, Biden was doing that, but he wasn't communicating that he was doing it. And then, of course, inflation was way too high early on. So those material things, getting people to refocus on that rather than focusing on social identity. Now, of course, Trump did successfully focus on those things in the fall election and somehow beat the Democrats with that message. But hopefully, before it's too late, people will say, okay, maybe just because Zuckerberg and Musk attend MMA fights and want to fight each other in a cage doesn't mean they're on my side.
Yeah, and when these policies actually have an adverse impact on the country and things start to get worse, there's going to be a lot of finger pointing and blame. And you're right, he'll try and point the finger at Joe Biden. We can't let him.
Right. And we have to get labor unions empowered and back with skin in the game. And, labor unions are the foundation of democracy. Teachers unions, we have to point out to people that elementary schools teachers are not your enemy. They're actually, they're Americans. They're not Musk and Zuckerberg, but we should care about elementary school teachers, not just tech billionaires getting their taxes cut. So that kind of economic message, one just hopes that it's not going to be too late, because if you look at states like North Carolina, even though there are more registered Democrats than registered Republicans, they have 11 Republican congresspeople, 3 Democrats. It's just a total electoral autocracy there. So one hopes that's
Wisconsin
not
for many years.
Yes,
won it back in Wisconsin, but it was a brutal fight. And in North Carolina, in order to preserve that electoral autocracy you're talking about, their Supreme Court is getting ready to throw out 60,000 perfectly good votes and saying, yeah, you know what, forget the voters.
Exactly. Exactly. I mean, they're not even doing it to preserve the electoral autocracy, because they're still going to have a majority of far right judges. It's just they're intolerant of anyone who's not far right entering in via the democratic process, and that's what we're going to see increasingly on the federal level. Unfortunately, I feel.
What do we do about the quality of the data that the world and Americans have relied on from our federal government? I am terrified that these crooks will, of course, take early looks at things like job reports so that they can game the markets for their private advantages. But I'm also terrified that they will lie in the next census in order to lock in their numbers, because they fired out the inspectors general last night.
They'll do everything. So you can expect that because of the people they're talking to. They love Viktor Orban. He does everything like that. I mean, Viktor Orban, and then Viktor Orban makes giant amounts of money from a kleptocracy, and we're seeing a kleptocracy arise. Trump created this crypto coin, made immediately $58 million or just on, and it's worth tens of billions. I mean, untraceable money going in, so we don't know who is giving this money to the Trump family. So, like a sort of open kleptocracy. That's what you have in Hungary too. You have Orban making enormous amounts of money for his family, and then throwing Christian nationalism, saying, "Well, we're keeping the LGBTQ citizens out." So let's hope let's hope the media can, do their job and report very centrally on the kleptocracy aspect.
Yep. Well, okay. Thank you for your time. You've been fascinating to talk to, and I'd love to do this again as this unfolds a little bit.
Sure.
Your teaching on these topics is so important, and I urge everyone listening, get any of those books that I mentioned at the beginning. They're all really important. You can find Professor Stanley online. You can find his work, Jason Stanley. Look him up, read his stuff, look at his videos if you want to read the books. It's all really important right now.
Thank you so much. And your work is very important too, this kind of journalism, in-depth
I'm
discussion.
not really a journalist, but I love journalists. I don't pretend to be one.
Right. Well, you're media.
Yeah.
In-depth discussion of the issues.
Yep. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay. We're going to take a break for the news. And when we come back, Tiffany Muller of End Citizens United is joining me.
You're listening to The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
Tiffany Muller, president of End Citizens United and Let America Vote, is back with us. I think we first talked, almost 2 years ago. But since that time, she's continued to do important, impactful work. She's raised over $200 million to protect and strengthen democracy. She's aided in electing hundreds and hundreds of people who are out there championing democracy. Her work, I know I said she raised $200 million, but her work is focused on getting the big money out of politics, protecting voting rights, and implementing all kinds of anti-corruption reforms. Like me, she began her career in a city council, so she knows how important good governance is every day in people's lives. I'm thrilled to have her back. Hi, Tiffany.
Hi, Edwin. Great to be back with you. Thanks so much.
Hey, we just hit the 15th anniversary of Citizens United. I wonder if it's worth taking a minute here. And, I think that decision was the logical outcome of the 1971 Powell memo and maybe the logical precursor to Congress's current inability to check an out-of-control president. What do you think about this?
Yeah, I mean, it is so hard to believe that it is been 15 years. And for all of your listeners, the Citizens United decision was a really disastrous and terrible decision that took two really pretty simple ideas, that money equals speech and that corporations are people. And it put a for sale sign on our democracy. And when the decision first came down, many folks will remember that President Obama actually said what we might see because of this ruling for our democracy in the years to come, and how special interest and mega donors would end up having so much more of a say in our policy outcomes than everyday people. And sadly, we've seen that not only come true, but now be put on steroids. In 2024, we actually saw almost $20 billion spent on the 2024 election. There were 7 mega donors, just 7 people, Edwin, who gave $1 billion to help elect Donald Trump. And you know what? Now, those biggest mega donors are being put in charge of the governmental agencies that are supposed to help the American people, and instead are doing the bidding of the biggest donors and the special interest. And you know what? This is not some obscure Supreme Court decision. What we're going to see is actually people's lives being hurt.
I think people's lives have already been hurt because of this decision, and it's going to get worse, absolutely worse. And let's put this out there so everybody knows it and we can address it and take it off the table. Democrats also got big donations, and we did, and we needed them. The difference is Democrats would gladly get rid of those donations and have supported efforts to undo Citizens United, and Republicans haven't.
That's exactly right. Look, I think that the unlimited money arms race has been hugely and deeply catastrophic for our democracy and for making real progress on any of the policy outcomes that we need, whether it's reducing the cost of prescription drugs or tackling gun violence or addressing the impacts of climate change, which we're seeing, ravage our country from coast to coast. Whatever it is, the gridlock and dysfunction in Congress is because of this money. Now, yes, both sides have a lot of money, but only one side is trying to fix the system. And that's the Democrats, who have tried to make sure that the money is transparent, that we know who's funding these elections, that's trying to make sure that everyone has the right and the ability to vote, that we end gerrymandering and actually make sure that people are being fairly represented, and yes, to get this big money out of politics. Whereas the other side, the Republican side, has just done more and more to double down on this big money and on so much of it being corrupt and not transparent and not being able to trace it back to where it came from.
Well, and it is a corrupting influence, and so you would expect the money to be spent to try and undo those functions of the government that fight waste, fraud, and abuse. And on cue, last night, Donald Trump fired, I think, 17 inspectors general inside the government in order to have less accountability.
That's right. That's right. Despite all their talking points about supposedly taking on government waste, really they are undermining the very infrastructures and the very watchdogs that are supposed to be making sure that that we're rooting out whether it's waste, fraud, abuse, corruption. And so, yeah, first of all, the firing of these inspector generals is taking those watchdogs out of getting them out of the way so that they can do whatever they want. Number two, we've seen it with agencies like the Federal Elections Commission, which has been gridlocked and dysfunctional for years, and now is actually deregulating campaign finance rules. Like, rather than enforcing the laws that are on the books, they're actually taking laws and rules and regulations off the books and are proud about it and bragging about it in their meetings. So right now, the folks who are supposed to be on the beat and watching out for the American public are too often being sold out by the mega donors as well.
Yeah, they've succeeded for the first time ever in privatizing the federal purse. It's an unbelievably huge amount of money that these guys now control for their own benefit, not our benefit. And that's a terrifying thing.
Look, he said during the campaign, he told the oil and gas execs, give me the money I need to help me win election. I'll make sure that you get all of the deregulation and drilling that you want. And now, what did he do on day one? He opened up more federal lands for more drilling. He put a big oil executive in charge at Energy, another big oil exec in charge at Interior. And they are doing exactly what they promised they would, and giving these folks a return on their investment.
I've talked about the guys surrounding Trump as oligarchs. I think you've gone a step further than I have yet gone and said we are actually living under an oligarchy. Talk about that.
Well, this is one of those words where I think everybody knows it and sees it, but we maybe don't have the catchiest word to break through to the American public yet, but an oligarchy is really a small group of people, very wealthy, normally individuals who have all the control of both government and kind of the capitalist society. And that's what we're seeing, right? What we saw on Inauguration Day were all of these, the richest people in the world and these tech billionaires sitting in front of the actual cabinet members, kind of in the row of honor there at the inauguration. And this is going to be the wealthiest administration in history. At least 13 billionaires have been appointed to this cabinet, and most of them have incredible conflicts of interest, right? Whether it's Dr. Oz, who's been appointed to take over the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, he's got at least $33 million of business in front of them. Or how about RFK, who has been nominated as HHS secretary, who makes millions from suing over vaccines, or the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, who got rich by betting against currencies around the world and has $150 million riding on the value of the dollar. The conflicts of interest go on, and they are far more concerned with lining their own pockets and helping continue this power and their richness than they are with actually implementing government services for the American people. And you know what they're seeing? They're already seeing it pay off. The day after Trump was elected, the richest people in the world got $64 billion richer in one day. That's an oligarchy if I've ever heard of one.
Yeah, I think that's right. And it isn't just the government that they influence. In order to protect their influence, they have to control civil society in some other ways. And we're beginning to see the pressure put on journalism, on labor unions, on higher ed, on any kind of nonprofit that they disagree with.
Yeah, we are seeing a full-out attack on experts and civil servants throughout government. We're seeing, you're absolutely right, we're seeing an attack on education. We're seeing attacks on nonprofits. We're seeing attacks just kind of across the board to weaken those institutions so that they are less apt to be able to successfully fight back against, all of this that we've been seeing over, for years, but also as they have taken power back over this last week. I think it is hard in this moment to stay hopeful and optimistic, and especially when there is so much bad news every single day. But I truly believe that what the American people want is they want a government that works to make their lives easier, and that is actually helping reduce the cost of groceries, and that is helping make sure that they can get ahead, and that if they work hard, they too can achieve the American dream. That's not going to happen in this administration, and we all have to make sure we're working every day to expose that corruption, to expose that hypocrisy, and to make it very clear about who they are fighting for versus who is fighting for the American people.
The way you said that is so important. And right before you were on, I was talking with Professor Jason Stanley from Yale, whose focus is on language and the language of fascism. And, the point he made, so similar to the one you just made, is this is a time when Americans are really not focused on the policies or policy outcomes. They're focused on whose side are you on? Whose side are you on? And Donald Trump has made that the most important issue in America by saying these other people, these university professors, these think tanks, these nonprofits, these journalists are lying to you. They're out to get you. Only I can tell you the truth and take you where you need to go, I and my billionaire friends. Whose side are you on? And most working class Americans, not by a large majority, but by a little majority, bought that argument. So when you say we have to let everybody know who they're really fighting for, this goes right at whose side are they on?
That's exactly right. And, honestly, the American people have been asking that question in election after election after election. Well, at least for the last 20 years, they have been saying, look, things are getting harder and the government isn't helping us, right? And they want to feel like their leaders are fighting to make their lives easier, to make their lives better. And that is our responsibility to make sure we are communicating every single day. And I think that it's going to become really clear really quick that this administration is fighting to give more tax cuts to the wealthy and to the big corporations. But I think everyday hardworking Americans and their families are going to continue to struggle. And so we have to both call that out and be very clear about how they are lining their own pockets, the self-interest, the self-dealing, the corruption. But we also have to have a plan of how we are going to help people and how we are going to help make sure that we are creating a government that really is addressing their biggest priorities. Look, right now, I just saw some numbers, Edwin. 75% of Americans think that our country is on the wrong track. And that is consistent across every party. Whether you are a Democrat, an independent, or a Republican, you think our country's going on the wrong track. So it's clear that we need reform. We need change. And I know that all of us fighting together for that change and for that reform can deliver that.
Well, one of those changes is to get all those oceans of dark money out of our politics.
That's exactly right. Yeah. That's exactly right. We have to have congressional majorities that will pass reforms like the Disclose Act that would make sure this money is transparent, like the Freedom to Vote Act that would actually protect our right to vote and do some of these other reforms we've been talking about. But to do that, we got to get the right people elected.
Yes, we absolutely have to get the right people elected, even if it takes super majorities to elect them because of the legacy of gerrymandering and of the corruption of voting rights. This particular crowd of oligarchs, I guess it's possible to imagine oligarchs who don't behave this way, but this crowd has bought fully into the white supremacist ideology, the stuff you see in Project 2025, the stuff that Russell Vought wants to deliver, get OMB to implement. That also can't be, that's going to have consequences Americans don't like.
And that's exactly right. And what we've seen is a partnership between corporate America, the evangelical right, and this kind of white supremacist organizations, all in a bid to gain power, but for different reasons, each of them wanting slightly different outcomes, but willing to join forces in order to get that power. And what they've done is they not only all backed Trump, but they also all have, joined forces to capture the Supreme Court, to do things like go after campaign finance rules so that they could end up spending more money so they could actually overturn Roe with the Dobbs decision. These movements have become very interconnected, but it wasn't always that way. And especially for corporate America, for a long time, they were a moderating force against the kind of evangelical right and white supremacy that we've seen. And because of wanting more tax cuts and wanting more profit and wanting more money for their shareholders and execs, they instead doubled down and joined forces with these folks. And we are, I think, going to see both the policy consequences of that, but we're also going to end up seeing some political backlash from that as well.
There's a story. It's an interesting one. It's related to that. The Boeing company, great company, was located in Washington State, where the engineers were, and they made fabulous airplanes. Then they moved their headquarters here to Chicago and became became the thing that interested them because of the financing of large capital projects like airplanes. And their engineering didn't get the attention it used to have. And then they moved their headquarters to Washington, D.C., and it became a lobbying company trying to get federal contracts for military stuff. And the engineering got no attention, and planes crashed. There are real consequences when the private sector decides what it needs to do is buy government as opposed to deliver great products.
Well, there used to be this idea that corporations, well, first, there was this understanding that corporations aren't people and that they already hold outsized influence in our country. And so they didn't need to also be able to fund elections or be able to spend in elections. And so for 100 years, from the Gilded Age until Citizens United, they were prohibited from being able to spend in our elections. And there was a countervailing force in America that was made up of people coming together and demanding that corporations protect the public welfare, right? Whether it was seatbelts in cars or that smoking was bad or that we shouldn't pollute our water and our air. There were these countervailing public welfare organizations and movements that pushed back against corporate power. With the Citizens United decision, with the rise of corporate PACs and corporate money, with this idea that the only thing corporations are actually responsible for is shareholder value, we have seen that corporations have amassed more power than they've ever had in our country without without that countervailing force to be able to balance it out. And so we are really in kind of unprecedented times, but also it is clear how we got here. And so this idea that all corporations should care about is shareholder value, I think is a real misnomer to what for hundreds of years corporations were supposed to care about, which was also their community and their employees and public welfare. But it is profit at all costs, no matter what, right? And that has just really destroyed so much of the guardrails in our society.
Yeah, it's tied to winning at all costs, no matter what. And one of the things that makes a democracy resilient is that the losers in an election, they know that, the rules are such that they could win again the next time. But if we think those aren't going to be the rules, then nobody's going to stay in the system and it's going to fall apart. And these guys are bending those foundational rules. So in the time we have left, Tiffany, what should people do?
Well, first and foremost, I mean, this has been even this conversation, right? This conversation doesn't necessarily leave people with a ton of hope. So I want to leave people with hope. I fundamentally believe in our country's ability to change and to even change in a quick turnaround period. I mean, I've seen it myself. I got started in politics doing gay rights organizing and fighting back against the anti-gay marriage amendments in 2004.
Yep.
And when those all passed, I was convinced I would never be able to get married. And here I am, married with a kid, amazing life, because our country changed very quickly. So, but people can't give up. The only way our country changes is that we stick together and we keep fighting the fight and we keep pulling that arc toward justice. And that's number one. Number two, we got to keep using our voices loudly to talk about the corruption, to talk about the self-serving, to talk about what is happening to families across this country, and to make sure that we are calling out this administration for the corruption it has. And for folks who want to join us, come to incitizensunited.org and join us in this fight. We have millions of members across the country, and we're not going to give up, and we're not going to go anywhere. And we all are in this together.
Tiffany, thank you so much for joining me again. I'm proud of your work. Anybody who's got the chutzpah to try and hold a rogue Supreme Court accountable and to undo some of the damage this Roberts Court has done is a champion in my book. Thank you.
Well, thank you, and thanks for having me on again. We're going to keep having these conversations, and I look forward to talking to you again soon.
You take care.
You too.
All right, everybody, quick break. And speaking of the courts, we're going to talk about that with Alex Aronson in a moment.
WCPT 820.
Okay, everybody, Alex Aronson is back with us. He is the founder and executive director of Court Accountability. Boy, what a good idea that would be. Alex is one of the heroes in this fight, and he knows it's a battle on lots of fronts. Alex, welcome back.
Edwin, thanks for the kind words. It's great to be back with you.
Hey, instead of starting in on a corrupt and captured Supreme Court, at least to start, can we talk about OMB? You spent a lot of time in the government, so have I. You know what OMB is, but I think it's worth explaining to everybody what it is, how powerful it is, and what damage a guy like Russ Vought could do if he leads it.
Yeah, so OMB doesn't get a lot of attention in sort of the national news coverage of the big appointments, but it's, as you note, an incredibly powerful and important office connected to the White House. I think a good way to think about it would be as sort of a hub for the implementation of the executive branch's agenda, particularly through the executive agencies. And Russell Vought, it sounds like your audience might be familiar with him, is
not enough.
He's the nominee to OMB, to lead OMB. He was Trump's director of that office, the Office of Management and Budget, the first time around. He's got deep experience in Washington, sort of the consummate insider, worked on the Hill, of course, ran that office in the first Trump administration. He knows the ins and outs of the government, and he has spent the last 8 years building this plan to implement the full-throated version of Project 2025 that he architected at a group called the Center for Renewing America, which is an offshoot of the conservative the conservative. The name's escaping me for a second. It's called CPI, but he has been, in detail, putting these plans together for the implementation of this Project 2025 agenda. And some of the plans he has in place are truly, truly far-reaching and scary if we want to break down what they're doing.
No, I think we do. But to do them, let's start, before we get to the specific plans, to do them, they have to pretend that something called the Impoundment Control Act doesn't exist. And people listening have heard this because I predicted for months it would be the first thing to go. I was wrong. A lot of other things have already fallen, but they're going to go after this one. So tell everybody what that means, and once they get rid of it or ignore it, what they're able to do.
That's right. The Impoundment Control Act of 1974. Now we're getting kind of wonky here, and the group I couldn't remember was the Conservative Partnership Institute, Jim DeMint's outfit. So the Impoundment Control Act was passed after President Nixon asserted a inherent unilateral power of impoundment. And impoundment is the concept under which a president asserts to be able to take the core congressional power, the power of the purse, and unilaterally decide not to spend money that Congress has authorized and appropriated. And when Nixon did that, the courts unanimously, Supreme Court unanimously struck him down. And even his own Office of Legal Counsel, which at that time was run by William Rehnquist, who would go on to be an ultra-conservative right-wing Supreme Court Chief Justice, said, this is nuts. We can't do this. So the Supreme Court struck him down, and then Congress, a broad bipartisan Congress, passed the Impoundment Control Act to actually create procedures by which the president could seek to not spend money that Congress wanted to spend. And there's a whole procedure that the executive is supposed to go through if they make this determination that as these folks are now claiming what they want not to spend money for the interest of avoiding waste and efficiency, which of course is a ruse. But what's truly terrifying about what they're doing here is it's not just that they're arguing that the Impoundment Control Act of 1974 is unconstitutional. Underlying that is, again, this claim of inherent executive authority. And at the CRA, at the Center for Renewing America, Russell Vogt and Mark Paoletta, who your audience may know from the famous picture of Clarence Thomas and Leonard Leo, the Supreme Court architect, and Harlan Crow, the real estate mogul who had given Thomas upwards of $4 million over the decades as he sought to foster that relationship and create these anti-regulatory outcomes at the court. He's the one that wrote the paper in the middle of 2023 to declare this inherent impoundment authority. And it's very clear from the way Vought handled his two confirmation hearings in the House and the Senate Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee and at Budget that they plan to just go straight through the strictures of the Impoundment Control Act and take this case right to the court.
And I think they want to take an additional step, not just refuse to spend money the way Congress has authorized it to be spent, but to take the purse and spend it entirely as they want to spend it.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this is part and parcel of this retributive agenda that we've seen unleashed in this first week of the administration. They're going to use this power as a one-way ratchet to reward their friends and to punish their enemies. And what's going to be so sad and tragic about its implementation is that they're not going to be able to, narrowly tailor these decisions. And people all across the country, in blue states, red states, and purple states alike, are going to feel the impact. And Republican elected officials need to answer for this, right? They, as we've seen so far, they are willing to do whatever it takes to stay in Trump's good graces, to confirm somebody as deeply unqualified, to as important a post as the Secretary of Defense like Pete Hegseth. But this is going to come right back to their home districts, to their home states, and people are going to suffer as a result of this agenda.
Well, we've handed them, if they get away with this, they will have a lever that is bigger and more powerful than anyone has ever had, which is the entire Treasury of the United States, to do with what they wish. And that is appalling.
It really is. And to tie it back to the court and this longer-term project that it's such a big focus of our work at Court Accountability, this 50-year campaign to really erode democracy and entrench oligarchy, we're seeing, what has been the central thrust of that effort is to take away congressional power under various of its core authorities, the commerce power, the spending power, and the attempt to establish this so-called unitary executive with broad sweeping executive power. And the court, which has all along the way sought to aggrandize its own power, has enabled this as part of this long-term right-wing Federalist Society agenda. And we saw the canary in the coal mine, really more than that, with the Trump versus United States immunity case, which not only protects presidents like Trump from criminal accountability, but handed presidents what they deemed preclusive and conclusive authority. And we're going to need to see the scope of what they're willing to allow as President Trump pushes those powers to their limit. And more than that, we're going to see the scope of their ability to restrain him if they even try.
Yeah, I worry. You called it a canary in a coal mine, and that is optimistic. I worry that it is the miners are dead, and it's a tombstone on a grave.
Yeah.
They've given way too much power to a president. And it's so interesting, Alex. They've undermined Congress left and right. So you would think that their decision to weaken the executive branch by saying, oh, no, you can't regulate. Congress has to do all the regulating. This undoing of the Chevron doctrine and a few other decisions over the last year. But it's cynical. It doesn't really give that power to Congress because Congress isn't equipped to have that power. It's like telling me I could fly. Sure, you have the power to fly, except that, God didn't give me wings.
And beyond that, they know that the same interests that put them in power, that are behind Trump and Project 2025, have Congress captured. This goes back to Citizens United and the flood of dark money and unlimited corporate and billionaire money into our politics. It's not just the Republicans that the billionaires can fund to make sure that they stay in power and could continue to pursue this obstructive non-agenda over the decades, but the Democrats themselves are trapped, right? They can never really serve the working people because at the end of the day, the big corporate interests, the monopolies that have been allowed to flourish, can wipe them out of office with an unlimited dark money campaign.
Yeah. Russ Vought is about to, he will get confirmed. I don't doubt it. I don't know how he swears an oath, which he would have to do when he says we're in post-constitutional times. Something he's very proud of.
Yeah, those are his words. I mean, he describes his vision as a radical constitutional vision. He's a self-described Christian nationalist. He's an abortion abolitionist. His views of the way the world should be are truly beyond the pale. I thought the Democrats in the two hearings he had did a serviceable job in pointing out just how extreme and far-reaching his agenda posed to be in terms of the real-world impact. But I don't think we've fully processed the extent to which he and this cabal of interests that have put him in power are willing to go to completely destroy and rebuild our country in their image. And to your point about the oath he's going to have to swear, that sort of came to light a little bit in these hearings as they asked him, will you follow the law? And he says, yes, of course I'll follow the law. But what he means is he'll follow the law as he believes it exists. And he has these views of the Constitution that have been rejected over and over through the centuries.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of not up to him. At least if we have a rule of law, it's not up to any individual to say the law is what I think it is.
Yeah, that's right. And, I think that I'm glad you brought up that rule of law phrase because we're hearing it a lot these days. And I think it's just an important concept to reckon with in this time. And what does rule of law mean? We've seen in other countries that have faced authoritarian threats, democratic decline, that judges are installed, they change the meaning of the law, and then the rule of law is that. Now. So it's sort of like an authoritarianism by legal means. And so I think we're far too reflexive to fall back on this rule of law construct as a way to organize our idea of what society means in a moment like this. And I think this is one of the big short-sightedness of the National Democrats as they try to engage with this challenge.
Yeah, I mean, I lived in Saudi Arabia and worked there for a long time. The rule of law as we in the West understand it is when people get together and decide the rules they're going to live by. Mm-hmm. But the rule by law, the law of rule, is as old as time, and it is not anything that liberates anybody.
Yeah. There's actually a Chicagoan, an amazing professor at the University of Chicago who recently wrote a wonderful book. It's a short primer. It's very accessible. He's brilliant. And it's about this concept of rule of law in the, after the first 25 years of the 21st century. I don't want to
put you on the spot because names are tough, but whose book is it?
His name is Aziz Hook. He's a wonderful professor, brilliant guy.
I'm writing that down. I'll be reading
H-U-Q.
H-U-Q. Got it. So Doge is now a thing. They, of course, could not make a department by executive order. I don't doubt a compliant Congress would have done it for them, but they were in a hurry, so they just renamed an existing department. But they found a way out, I don't understand, to get Elon Musk to have authority in the United States government, but not covered by any of the ethics rules that govern or disclosure rules that govern anybody else who works for the people. How is that possible?
Well, it's not. It's illegal, and it's interesting the way they did this. There was a lot of anticipation, planning.
Yeah. Yep.
You know, we saw immediately upon the first day of the administration a number of lawsuits to challenge this. Everybody assumed it would be set up as a federal advisory committee, and there are rules and laws in place that restrict the way those committees are set up, and so that's what those lawsuits were based on the Federal Advisory Committee Act, and anticipated violations of it. But it was actually kind of clever, I think, the way they did it. They renamed the United States Digital Service, an existing sort of sub-quasi-agency of the White House, and I think they very clearly did that to circumvent those FACA challenges. At the same time, there are other laws that require the performance of what are known as inherent government functions to be performed by federal employees who should be subject to ethics rules, ethics laws. Yep. And it seems very clearly that what Elon Musk is doing, effectively running a shadow presidency, would meet that definition. And so we'll see what type of legal challenges emerge to stop that. And then, of course, it comes back to the courts, which, I think
will be very busy. The good news is that there are great federal judges in the system, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them. And the Supreme Court is not going to take every case. They can't. They have some limits. So
that's right.
I don't think the judiciary is completely corrupt.
Oh, no, of course it's not. And President Biden and your home state Senator Dick Durbin deserve a lot of credit for some really incredible judicial confirmations over the last 4 years. And it's certainly a very important first-line bulwark to bring these lawsuits, to get these national injunctions, which are, there are real problems with the national injunction status quo that we have now. We've seen the right exploit this flaw in the system through the Northern District of Texas and the extremist judge down there, Matthew Kacsmaryk, and others. But there will be very important legal challenges that at least slow down some of this stuff.
But we just did it with a 14th Amendment.
Yep, absolutely. And so, but those cases will make their way to the court when you've got a nationwide injunction placed on a major national policy like that. I think the court's going to have a hard time avoiding that stuff, and it's going to have a ton of opportunities to both advance the Trump Project 2025 agenda, those parts of it with which it agrees. And this is admittedly sort of taking my cynical view of the way these right-wing justices operate, but then also opportunities to strike down theories and plans that go farther than they want and give themselves more opportunity to create the appearance of themselves as
legitimacy. Yeah, that's why I don't think they're going to strike down birthright citizenship. It's too clear in the law.
I think so too, and I think this impoundment question is another one where I even a cynic like myself would have a hard time seeing them going full bore for this. But you never know. You never know with these folks.
I got to ask you a very difficult question, because I know you worked closely with and know very well Senator Whitehouse. He's been on this show. I'm a very big fan of his, but I think yesterday he may have said, RFK Jr. is a longtime friend and I might vote for him.
I saw
that.
Can
you shed any light on that?
I don't think I can shed any light on it, other than to say that I would be disappointed if my former boss did vote for RFK. It's been the politics of that confirmation have been very strange. Leonard Leo, the court architect, has been active in opposing RFK's nomination. I think underlying his opposition is the issue of abortion, which is Leonard Leo's probably first held principle and most clear priority. RFK and the incoming HHS folks refused to give one of Leo's close allies, Roger Severino, a top deputy position there. I don't know what Senator Whitehouse is thinking. I don't want to kind of get ahead of him on the actual vote. Yep. It would be ultimately quite shocking to me if he did do that. But I will say one thing about my old boss is that he while an incredible champion for democracy and justice and the people and against oligarchy and protecting the climate, he has these relationships that go back for a long time, and he takes them seriously. And on questions like this, he'll certainly listen to the voices of his constituents, to important pillars of the advocacy community. But he makes his own mind up at the end of the day. It's one of the things that I admire about him, but also could certainly have. It was challenging once or twice as a staffer.
Well, as he should. I mean, he has to live with a vote, as he should. So,
it would be a reckless confirmation, particularly in the post-pandemic era, and this guy's dangerous views on vaccines and other public health issues.
Yep. Hey, we're in, the end game of Viktor Orban's playbook here in the United States. And I am a Democrat. I've been, though, somewhat, I'm proud of the work that we have done, but I've been a little bit critical of our aging leadership in Washington and think that we could have some stronger fighters. And I want to sort of get your sense about that, about, how we unleash the. I just have this. I'm sorry, I'm rambling.
Okay.
This
I'm with you.
Scene from The Godfather has been in my head, mostly with regard to Merrick Garland, but with regard to a lot of them, where Al Pacino leans over and says, "Tom, you're not a wartime consigliere. I love you. You're like a brother to me, but you're not a wartime consigliere." And I just, there's times when you need people who are tough.
Yeah, I couldn't probably be more disappointed in the posture of the Democratic leadership and most of its rank and file, frankly, since the election of Donald Trump. I think there's a lot of, misreading of what brought us here and the exactly wrong impulse in terms of how to respond to it, looking for accommodation, compromise, normalizing what is not just extreme in terms of what our country has been through and what is acceptable, but completely in a different paradigm, a fundamentally anti-democratic paradigm.
Yeah. It's not a normal time.
And in this environment, we've got just a handful of leaders, people like Jamie Raskin and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who are willing to even use words like theocracy or Nazi, which is, I think quite clearly how you should describe what Elon Musk was signifying on the day of Trump's inauguration. And, it's more of the same in terms of decades of resorting to vague and abstract concepts like bipartisanship and institutionalism and rule of law that don't do anything for people anymore. They don't, you can't eat institutions. You can't eat the rule of law. And people are struggling out there. They distrust these institutions. They distrust both parties. They see them both as equally corrupt. I don't believe they are equally corrupt, but I think the Democrats, unless they start to draw these starker contrasts and fight back against what is so deeply un-American and unacceptable to our core and fundamental values, they're not going to be able to convince people, and they're not going to be able to bring back the base that they've lost.
Right. This is old habit of pretending it's a normal time and approaching the other party by normal means. Yeah. When the other party's a tiger and looks at you like a meal. It's a very bad idea. We've just had 5 days that could change the world. Yeah. 5 lawless, reckless, greedy days where the Republicans have made clear that there are no boundaries they won't run over, that there are no norms that they respect, and there's nothing they just don't want to take and hand to their billionaire friends. And if we can't make that, if that doesn't wake them up, then, we need a new crop of people who are awake and aware and ready to take that fight.
I could not agree more. Yeah, and it's not only does it give cover to the authoritarian attack on our democracy and on our values and on our freedoms, but it is politically reckless and foolish. And I think the product of this kind of institutionalized polling and corporate industrial complex that has got too much of the ear of Democratic leadership.
Okay, so we've talked about OMB, we've talked about Russ Vought and the damage that he can do to the whole government. We've talked about using the enormous power of the purse of the United States, not as the legislature intends it, but just for whatever ends the guy in charge has, all of which will be challenged in court. A lot of that will end up in front of the Supreme Court, which has been on a 15-year or so fight to limit democracy. What should Americans do?
We have to stay engaged. We have to stay informed. We have to build power and connection in our communities and leverage that to assert our will and have our voice be heard. And, this last part of the conversation about the inability of Democrats to find themselves, to find a soul, to find a fight in this moment of obvious urgency is, I think, a ripe opportunity for people to get engaged. Democrats need to know this is not acceptable. They need to hear from people. It's a great time to, I said stay engaged and informed. So many people are running away from the news, and it's so understandable. Why would you want to engage with this? It's heart-rending. It's sickening. It adds stress to our daily lives, and that's understandable. And I think taking care of ourselves first and foremost in our families and communities needs to be a priority. But once we've done that, we must understand truth and share truth, build community around these ideas and the promise of democratic action and pushback. If you look at other countries that have experienced authoritarian takeovers like this, it's really hard to get out of it, right? Particularly after you've got the Supreme Court captured and the laws being changed. But it's not impossible. We need to stand up against authoritarian activity. We need to expose it. We need to speak to it for what it is, and in a blocking sense. And then we need to build toward the future that we know is possible, toward the future that our children deserve, and not give up on ourselves, because that's what democracy is, right? It's not the idea that we represent these people and they take power and represent us. We must stay engaged between the elections and hold on to that.
And by the way, everybody, we have an example. I mean, Wisconsin, the most gerrymandered state in the nation, was a state that the people's voice could not be heard unless they had an enormous supermajority. And you know what? They got them. They came together, they organized together, and they managed to get fair maps, and they managed to flip their Supreme Court. It's harder to do on a national scale, but it is a similar problem where the deck is stacked against ordinary people, but they came together and they did it. We can do it.
Absolutely.
Alex, it's great to catch up. Thank you so much.
Always. Thanks so much, Edwin. Have a wonderful rest of your weekend.
Thank you. You too. All right, everybody, we need to take a break for the news, and when we come back, Axios' award-winning climate reporter, Andrew Freeman, is joining us.
You're listening to The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
Okay, welcome back, everybody. Andrew Friedman is, as I said before the break, award-winning senior climate reporter for Axios. He has a law degree, a master's in climate and society. His undergrad work was in political science, and he's been using all of that education in his reporting on climate for, forgive me, Andrew, if I get it wrong, but I want to say about 15 years. And it's even possible that, is it, Andrew, am I right? Are you the guy who gave us the term polar vortex?
Sadly, yes.
Why is that sadly? I think I just lived through one here in Chicago.
It totally jumped the shark. It's on billboards. It's on, it's on TV ads. So, but it is a real scientific term, and I was one of the first ones to use it in that winter when Chicago was known as Chiberia.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about where we are. I mean, California is burning. Much of the rest of the country is freezing. They've been sledding in New Orleans, and the incoming administration is determined to drill, baby, drill. How should we think about this?
There's many ways to think about this. I think climate impacts are becoming more and more obvious to us. The California wildfires are one example of kind of a complicated array of causes that includes climate change. There's a climate link to the cold snap, but not exactly a causal link. Mm-hmm. What happened in the South with that snowstorm was absolutely generational storm. I mean, mm-hmm. that nobody living there has ever experienced that. And if you look globally, we've seen more severe and frequent extremes, from heat waves to heavy precipitation events. So we're feeling it and we're paying for it monetarily. However, the new administration has come in. They want to do very pro-fossil fuel policies. There's complications with being able to pull some of those off, partly because oil and gas companies don't necessarily want to drill baby drill based on prices right now and based on, how much they're producing. America is currently already the largest oil and gas producer out there. And
their profits are huge.
Yeah, and they're kind of acting as if that's not the case, as if Biden kind of squelched all production, when in reality, we were number one back then too. So I think of it as a race. I think there's a race going on to dominate clean tech and renewables, and right now China's winning that race. And depending on the policies of the next 4 years, we could hand them a bigger lead, possibly an insurmountable lead in certain technologies such as EVs, or we could keep up. And some of those stories are going to be really fascinating, with state policies and local and regional trying to make progress anyway.
I think some of the drill baby drill stuff is shorthand, not for drill, because I don't think the energy companies want a glut that would lower the price, but perhaps pipeline, that they would want better opportunities and better ports, better to ship fossil fuels around the world.
I mean, to some extent, I think that might be true. I think they want. I mean, one thing that they want and they're going to get is a resumption of the LNG export terminals that the Biden administration had paused new approvals. There's also an effort to get LNG export terminals built in Alaska. So to some extent that's true, and you did see President Trump in his first term, try to push Keystone forward, and then Biden said no, and then the company kind of abandoned it in the first place. So there is an enthusiasm for more pipeline building, and interestingly, the clean tech sector wants that too, because carbon capture and storage technologies are going to require some pipelines in order to move around CO2. Yeah. So same also with certain hydrogen infrastructure.
Yeah. I have had complicated my own feelings about the big LNG terminal, in part because I wanted to protect Europe from Russian oil. A geopolitical issue, not an environmental issue. I think it works the other way with Trump, though, who doesn't care about Europe's independence from Russian oil. It's interesting.
I mean, I think so far the comments that he's made regarding Russian oil and gas has been to threaten to take further action against them, depending on their moves towards peace in Ukraine. Yep. So we'll see how they go that way. It is a national security issue. I think if you look at the study that the Energy Department did under Biden, there was a lot in there about whether exporting so much LNG to Europe was raising prices at home and causing any sort of national security implications for the United States.
Yep.
And whether it was really containing Russia, since they have this shadow fleet of tankers that's still moving oil and gas around the world. But yeah, I mean, that's a complicated situation where if you just are looking at climate considerations, you want that stuff to phase out. And if you are looking at national security implications, you are thinking, okay, we need to ship more of that to Europe. We need to ship more of that to our partners in Asia.
Yeah. It can phase out, but not yet. Yeah, it's a complicated challenge. Yep. Hey, so of course, on day one, Trump abandoned the Paris Climate Accords, declared this, national emergency. I want to get your take on this. Do you think there is still a chance, any chance, that the world will not hit the 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels goal that was at the heart of that Paris Treaty? I know it was really 2 degrees was the absolute outside limit, they said, but we've been aiming for 1.5. Do you think with the current point of view of the Trump administration now, there's any chance we will succeed in meeting that goal?
I actually think that even if former Vice President Harris had been elected, we weren't going to meet that goal.
Yeah.
Most scientists I talk to tell me that goal is pretty much gone. Yeah. And the thing is that is particularly scary and sad about that is that goal was pushed by small island nations. So the nations that have the most to lose. And,
Vanuatu. Go on.
Yeah, it's an aspirational goal. But they view it as life or death because of sea level rise. And they think that 2 degrees C increase, which is still on the table as far as emissions are going, that is too high for them to have a very good chance of surviving and thriving. I should put it, depending on which nation it is.
Young people have sort of heard about some of this, and they are terrified because they think the climate change is an existential disaster for us, and if we miss the 2 degrees, we're all dead. And I think it's a little more complicated. I think people will die for sure, and whole nations like those island nations may have to relocate, and we are really proving that we stink at refugees and immigrants these days. But does this mean that the bulk of our focus should move from prevention to mitigation now? To, let's move people away from the coast. Let's figure out where we can grow crops differently than where we used to be able to grow them. I mean, is that the world we're in now?
I think there needs to be both. And I think that for a while it was viewed as a trade-off, so we didn't talk about adaptation so much.
Yeah.
It was viewed kind of in the environmental community as as the equivalent of cursing. You wanted to focus mitigation, don't talk about adaptation. And now we ourselves in the United States are having to adapt to more frequent flooding along the coast, even on sunny days in Florida. And officials have to, instead of calling it sea level rise related, they're just calling it road raising projects to get around the governor's mandate of not really talking about climate change. So
people are so creative.
So
I kind of like that. Gives me confidence. That's a piece of good news.
I know it kind of is. I think that we really do have to do both. We have to redouble our efforts on mitigation so that we don't go higher and higher on temperatures. Right now, we're pretty much on course to between 2.7 and 3 degrees C of warming, which is potentially disastrous in the long term. It is not, when I talk to people about how existential this threat is, it's existential for certain people, for certain countries, and certain ecosystems. It's not existential, in my view, towards humanity as a whole. But, wealthy nations are going to do better than poorer nations, and we all are already being affected as it is. So, the bottom line answer to your question is really we got to be doing both at the same time, and it's a lot of work to do both.
Well, I can't imagine. I mean, 3 degrees Celsius, I think that makes part of India and parts of the GCC almost unlivable. And that's hundreds of millions of people.
Yeah, it makes parts of India, parts of the Gulf, not the Gulf. I'm not talking to the Gulf of Mexico or Gulf of America now. I'm talking to,
GCC.
The
equally disputed named body of water, because it's the Persian Gulf unless you're in Saudi Arabia, where it's the Arabian Gulf. Yeah.
Yep. I would say that is the area that is first becoming uninhabitable, in the sense that it is just the heat index is just too high given the heat plus humidity in the summer. So what they're doing is really trying to adapt to it by keeping people indoors as frequently as possible, with ingenuity and endless oil and gas money to spend on that problem.
So just people have to understand what it means when the heat and humidity go up like that. Your body can't cool. The perspiration doesn't evaporate. So your body temperature keeps going up, and ultimately that kills you. So that's a really frightening prospect.
And it's happening in the U.S. too. I mean, the number of heat-related deaths in Phoenix and Vegas and other locations that have seen record hot summers recently have caused new discussions among climate specialists and health specialists about the climate health intersection already being clear when we're not quite at 1.5 degrees C warming over multiple decades. We did go past 1.5 C for a year in 2024.
Yeah. And it'll have impacts on agriculture and how we grow our food in ways that I don't think we yet understand.
True. Some of the findings we know, and they're interesting from an intellectual standpoint. I guess from a emotional standpoint, they're not at all comforting. It's, there are people in the new administration who kind of view CO2 as more of a miracle than a enemy, especially because of its ability to sort of juice plant growth.
Yep.
However, what happens when you get to a certain level of warming and a certain level of CO2 in the atmosphere, as we're finding, is that it actually causes the nutrition of the crops that we're growing to start declining. So we might be able to grow the same amount, but it's not necessarily going to nourish the same
number of people.
Yeah.
Wow. Really frightening. Speaking of frightening, you do amazing work, but you rely on a lot of data. Where are journalists, where are scientists going to get their data? Where are they going to get the information they need to research and to report on climate when the government shuts down, its agencies that would gather and report this, or when they fudge the results, or when they don't fund the research?
So it's unclear to me what they're going to do on climate. We saw this week the lightning fast blitz on DEI initiatives, right? Identifying and dismissing diversity, equity, and inclusion staff at all federal agencies. So that happened in 1 week. And that got me thinking, well, hey, what happens when they come to climate, which is different? There are many more people in the government that do climate science related work. There's billions and billions of dollars devoted to it at about 13 federal agencies. But we know that the incoming head of OMB wants to kind of root out, I forget his term for it, but root out basically the climate infrastructure of the federal government. There were fears in the first Trump administration that like all data sets were going to go dark, and that did not happen. What did happen, of course, was you had the president draw, a Sharpie on a weather map and then get the Weather Service to retroactively say, hey, the president's forecast was right when it wasn't right. So you could have meddling with the final versions of reports that go out to the public where scientists are overruled and, you could see resignations. But are they really gonna just start taking data offline? They took, I believe in the first term, they took the EPA global warming website down, but many other agencies fared better. And I don't know what they're going to do here. I do think that the first week here of the DEI action leads some people in the government to believe that a more aggressive posture and more worrisome scenarios may play out. But I don't want to prejudge it. I think that the government is very good at collecting weather and climate data. I don't know whether they're going to be still good at doing that, just not communicating it or not communicating it in the same way, which has happened in administrations past.
Andrew, they've talked about privatizing NOAA so that it becomes a corporation.
Talked about privatizing specifically the National Weather Service.
Yep.
And that was in Project 2025. And I will say one thing that would prevent that would be Congress, because if you look at who has sponsored some of the bills on improving weather forecasting in the United States, one of them is the Senate Majority Leader, John Thune. There's bipartisan support for NOAA in the House and Senate. And everybody wants, one of the things they did, like with the F-35 fighter jet being so costly, They made sure that parts of that plane were made in all sorts of congressional districts. So that it would have wide support. Now, the National Weather Service has about 122 offices throughout the U.S., so there's going to be a senator from Oklahoma who says, wait a minute.
I got your point. Pork barrel politics might save data on weather.
It might.
Yeah, that would be good. I mean, I'll take it. Hey, but what about FEMA? I mean, in a time where, as you point out, we are seeing what used to be 100-year events, once-in-a-generation events, that phrase doesn't even mean anything anymore. They want to drastically cut back FEMA. Is that prudent?
Well, I can't really judge whether it's prudent or not. It's not my role, but I can say there's no replacement that they're putting forth. In other words, they're saying states should do it, but states don't have the capacity to do it. So, there's got to be some sort of entity that comes in and says, we're bringing in all this aid and all this equipment and going to take over here. And if that's not FEMA, then who? FEMA also has support in Congress. FEMA has support for potentially becoming an independent agency rather than being part of the Homeland Security Department, which they are right now. But keep in mind, there was all that misinformation and disinformation about FEMA's activities in North Carolina and threats against FEMA personnel. And I think that there's a through line from that episode to what Trump was saying over the past couple of days about FEMA, because I think he seems to be buying into a lot of those rumors that were not actually true regarding what FEMA was doing on the ground. FEMA definitely needs reform, but whether FEMA needs to just suddenly go away with nothing to replace it is an interesting question.
Well, it sounds to me like the COVID response the last time he was in office, which was to say the states are on their own and have to compete with each other to try and get masks or anything else they need. It's not how one nation is supposed to act.
No, it's not what you'd expect from a nation like the United States. But governors definitely got creative at that time. But it was unfortunate.
And a lot of people died. Hey, so what? Looking, ahead, are you going to be focusing, your efforts on the changing policy environment, the politics of climate, or the climate itself?
So I focus a lot on the climate itself and on extreme events and the intersection between extreme events and climate change. But at the same time, I'm also keeping an eye on the changing politics and policy. Yeah, I have great colleagues at Axios Pro and also my colleague on Axios Generate newsletter who are really focused on energy policy and other aspects of policy. But FEMA falls into my beat, as does NOAA, NASA, and DOE and other agencies that do a lot of climate science. So I'm going to be focused on what's going on in terms of changing policies, changing personnel at these agencies, and whether or not they do pursue some sort of radical solution that significantly changes an agency like NOAA, which everybody kind of recognizes as the agency that goes into hurricanes and that gives them their weather alerts,
Yeah. Wow. Well, it's going to be interesting, and it's going to be frustrating, I think, but I'm glad you're doing it. We need people who know how to get the information and get it to us, honestly, particularly when there's a partisan side that doesn't want us to have it. So, Andrew, I am a big fan of your work, and everybody should go on Axios and look up Andrew's work. It's really first rate and important. So thank you. I really appreciate your time, and I really appreciate your work, and I really appreciate your wisdom.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
Take care. Bye. All right, everybody. I have a bit of an announcement. Normally, we take a break here and then go into your calls. That might work, but we're having some phone problems. You can text me at 773-763-9278, and I can read the texts, and we can talk that way. But we'll see how that works. And if not, I will bring in a surprise guest who I think you on this station know, and it'll be fun to talk to her. So we'll try that when we come back.
You're listening to The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
All right, everybody. I don't think you can call in. I think our phones are down. You can text in at 773-763-9278. And I want to experiment with that for a little bit, see if that works and you can get through. But if not, I have a secret surprise guest for you that is, I think, known on this station. So that will be kind of fun. Meanwhile, though, while I wait to see if you can text in, I want to go back to some things that we talked about sort of earlier in the show. I just think this is a week that if we are unable to rise to the occasion, will change our country and our world forever. We will be back into an era of imperium with deeply weakened democracies in the West, and the deals between emperors again that history has shown lead to unbelievable, not just a loss of human life and war, but a loss of human freedom everywhere. And this week was one for the record books that way. And I'm not just talking about, they say they're dismantling DEI. That's nonsense. They're dismantling equal protection under the law. They say that's what they're saving by getting rid of DEI, but they're literally getting rid of orders that say you have to treat people equally. And then they're not treating people equally. They're certainly not treating women in the military equally. They're not treating them, they're not giving them the same opportunities to give everybody else. This isn't about merit, unless merit is described as being a loyal white guy. That's not merit. This isn't about finding the best people. And what's gone on at the Justice Department, getting rid of people working on enforcing the laws that Congress passed, laws that are on the books, and instead taking those lawyers and putting them in a new effort to criminalize resistance to the Trump administration. That's what this is, criminalizing resistance to the Trump administration. This so-called, I can't even remember what it's called. It's a new office that's meant to, it's called the Sanctuary City Working Group, criminalize people for that. This is unheard of in our country, unheard of. And if an ICE agent stops you and says, where are your papers? Otherwise, I'm going to take you in. What are you supposed to do? Right? But that's what's going on now in the country. It's like some crazy old movie from the 1930s in Europe. So we have got to stay together, call this out, tell people about it, demand an end to it, because even in autocracies, even in countries that have never had democracy, like China, the people are not helpless. We can make our voices heard. We can affect government policy. And you bet in this country, we can save our democracy. We can save the idea that all people are created equal. I've given you plenty of time to text in, and I see no texts. Paul, is that right? I don't, actually. Oh, now I do, I think. Okay, so let's see. Hello, it would be very helpful if you gave the name of your guests. Okay, I apologize. I will do so in the future. That is a very good thing. And I did at the beginning, but I should have kept it up. Someone else writes, I wish I knew who these people were who were writing it. Say your names. Say your names in your text. I can read them out. And there's a lot of talk about the environment here, some pictures that look kind of frightening about the environment. I'm just going down here. How do I tell my 26-year-old daughter that I adopted from China that she needs to carry her passport after I told her I was so happy she was out of Chinese mindset that diminished women? She's a lawyer, but now still wary. Oh my gosh, how sad and how poignant and accurate a picture that is of us, right? I think what you tell your daughter is, fight back so that it doesn't stay this way. Fight back. This is, we just need to do that now more than ever. Someone else writes, think out of the box. Joe Biden did shore up pensions. And I love the police, too. I'm a liberal. 5% of bad cops and 5% of people who hate the police accepted. Most of us get along just fine. It wasn't the Democrats who stormed the Capitol and injured and killed police officers in that insurrection attempt. Remember that little detail. Yeah, well, I'm not forgetting it. Somebody else writes, Dear Edwin, are you as depressed as I am? No, I'm not. I'm not depressed. I'm furious. I don't know if my reading this is making for good radio. I suspect it might not be. So what should we do if we get stopped for nothing? Asks Raina in Pilsen. I don't know. I mean, try not to get stopped by an ICE agent for sure. And make sure you're with other people so that they know where you are, so you don't disappear, so we can protect you. You know what? I'm gonna do something different because I just really don't think this is making for the kind of radio you guys want to listen to. Although I see these texts keep pouring in, and maybe I will edit them, write about them, and put that on Substack so it's not lost. But right now, I'm going to ask a guest that is normally one of Joan's regular guests to join us. Jennifer Schulze, of course, former news director at Channel 9 here at Chicago. She's a fabulous journalist. You know what? She also happens to be my bride, which I don't know if is like well known to the audience here. But we're going to now share with you some of the conversations that we usually have between us about politics. Jennifer, are you there?
I don't know if everybody's ready for that.
Yeah, I can barely hear you.
Oh. How's that? That's
a little better.
All right.
All right. Would you just take a minute and you got a whole new piece out just yesterday. You want to talk a little about that?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I wrote a piece about the first week of Trump and the media coverage of that. But I pegged it to something you probably have heard about, but in case you haven't, I'll just go through it. I'm sure everybody's heard about did Elon Musk wave his arms like a Nazi or not at Trump's inaugural debate. A meteorologist in Milwaukee thought that, yes, he did look like a Nazi, and she wrote something about it on her Instagram page on Monday, her private Instagram page. Her name is Sam.
You're looking at the big picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
Well, I know this is a little wonkier show than usual. I thought maybe you would have a chance to hear from Jennifer Schulze, and maybe now that's working. Jennifer, are you there?
I am. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, and maybe the audience can hear you. So.
No, I think my connection is not good, Edwin. It just keeps flashing.
You sound great right here.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So let me ask you this. So a weather reporter, right, on her private Instagram says, wow, it's a little weird to see a Nazi salute at the inauguration of the president. And what happened to her?
She got fired.
Okay. She got fired? How is that possible?
Well, I'm not really sure. I think it's remarkably surprising that.
Okay. I don't know if anybody can hear Jennifer. I've now lost her. So I'm going to just pretend that it's just me. And I don't know if you're hearing me or hear Jennifer answer the question. That's live radio for you in America. And if anybody's in the Studio, you let me know. So let me just go back to some of the texts that I got, because, I thought they were pretty interesting. One says, please read Mother Jones. Boy, do I agree with that. That's awfully good stuff. One was a reminder that we should keep our focus on, like, the Capitol Police who were attacked. I can hear her. She's talking loud and clear. I hear her talking from another room. Okay. Can you hear me? I mean, what, Paul? All right, I'll tell her. That's fine. But are we live? Everybody, this is quite a show. So let me just, you know what? In fairness, let me talk about something else. I mean, really, I only have a little bit of time, so let me talk about something else here, just for the next 8 minutes or so, because it's kind of interesting and important, and I think maybe you'll find it important. And this, I have to tell you a story about my life, a little. Because what Donald Trump has done, January 6th, and the pardoning of these people, it was a turning point, I think, for a lot of us who really believe in a kind of America that he doesn't believe in. And they're motivating moments. And the right wing has had their motivating moments. They called them Waco and Ruby Ridge, and I'll talk about those in a minute. But it's personal for me because we are coming close to the 30th anniversary of the bombing of the Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City. And back then I was at the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, and I had colleagues in that building. I mean, it was a normal Wednesday, and it became one of the most horrible days you can ever imagine. The images that came up on, back then we got our news from television were devastating. It was a 9-story building. It was ripped to shreds. Today we sort of say those are images that look like we see from Gaza, but it was Oklahoma City, and it was 1995, and it was a more innocent time. We didn't have the context for this kind of destruction. And a member of my staff said, in tears, that it looked like an axe had cleaved through the center of the building. What we learned was 168 people were murdered that day. 35 were my colleagues. And, the murderers target the U.S. government, but guess what? There was a daycare center in that building, and 19 children were killed. In all, I think 850 people were injured, and 219 lost at least one parent. I mean, just imagine that. This was right-wing rage. And it was right-wing rage that had come out of the lies that surrounded 2 standoffs with law enforcement, one in Waco, where the Branch Davidian cult, and another in Ruby Ridge with a white supremacist guy named Randy Weaver. Both ended in tragedy, for sure. But both tragedies were further compounded by those right-wing lies, all aimed at growing membership for anti-government militias. And militia propaganda claimed that the government was abusing powers to deprive citizens of their rights and attempting to suppress any who would, sort of refuse to conform. This is terrible. Timothy McVeigh and Terry Nichols, they were radicalized by those lies, and they went to work on retribution, and my colleagues and those children in that daycare center are dead because of it. I gave the keynote address at the memorial held for the federal employees in Chicago. I talked about our powerful diversity, our resilient spirit, our broken hearts. And I said I knew we would heal, but we would never forget. And that was 1995. And I haven't forgotten. How could I? And you know what? The same ideology of hate, the same culture of extra legal vigilante force, the same racist political ideology lives in the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys, those paramilitaries that so love Donald Trump. It's a certainty that if McVeigh were still alive, if he hadn't been executed and he were out of jail, he would have been among those January 6 insurrectionists. And early in the Biden administration, the whole government, not just the presidency, they redoubled their efforts to prevent domestic terrorism. But all of that changed when Donald Trump, on his first day, pardoned or commuted the sentences of 1,500 of those January 6 domestic terrorists. And he set seditious conspirators like Stuart Rhodes and Enrique Tarrios, those are the leaders of the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys, back onto our streets. I mean, and almost immediately once they got there, they started talking retribution again. In an instant, Trump made America less safe. In an instant, he emboldened extremist militias across the country, and he stamped the presidential seal on right-wing vigilantism. But for me, there was something else. It was as if he stood on the graves of my murdered colleagues and shouted, "Suckers, you died in vain." They didn't. They just didn't. They're martyrs. And it may have taken 30 years, but something new is born in America watching this week. January 6th and his disgraceful pardons and all of the horrors that he demonstrated he was up to this week, Mr. Trump, they're for us who love America, what Waco and Ruby Ridge were for those militias who just want to tear us apart. And they're also a reminder of that horrible April day 30 years ago when right-wing hate took so many American lives. I'm telling you this story because it's coming up on that anniversary, and I can't forget it. But look, it is now our turn to be furious, to call out the government for abuse, for trying to strip away our rights. And we don't have to do it the way the right wing did. I'm not calling for vigilantism. I'm not calling for us to get armed and go around strutting around pretending to be an army that we're not. These guys only know how to tear things down. Ours is a constructive force. And as mad as I am, I'm going to hold on to what matters. And you know what? We are stronger than the militia movement and the president who turns to them for political support. We don't want violence to prevail. We're stronger because we have something powerful to fight for. Right-wing animus is nothing compared to the idea that's America. So I don't know. 30 years ago, I swore to help our country overcome those wounds. And I swore to remember the victims of American right-wing violence who gave their lives that Wednesday, whose lives were stolen that Wednesday. And I haven't wavered from that course. And good Americans everywhere, we owe it to ourselves and to the victims of that attack in Oklahoma City to break the right-wing fever that's consuming so much of our country. We owe it to our children to tell the truth, whether it's about the 2020 election or January 6th or the shocking abuses of power that this new president is delivering in rapid fire. And, we owe it to future generations to restore the kind of government and the kind of decency that Mr. Trump has so contemptuously abandoned. Anyway, those are my reflections on this upcoming anniversary. This go look it up. Look up the images of what right-wing vigilantism and hate did to Oklahoma City. If you're ever there, go to the memorial that's there. It's beautiful. And this is the world that Mr. Trump is trying to bring back to all of us. These 5 days he just had that could change the world and turn us into that. I'm sorry, no, absolutely not. We still have the power to stop it. And that's where I'm going to end this week. I apologize for the technical glitches and the technical difficulties. We'll get it straightened out. And next week, maybe I'll reserve a little extra time for calls at the end to hear from you. Have a great week. I'll talk to you next week.